Hi, Claudia.
Hi, sorry
Um,
about that. I was sitting there thinking, I wonder what happened. And then my husband said, maybe they're looking at my name, not yours.
yeah, no, I think I had you somewhere, I had you kind of pinned to come in, but clearly my Zoom powers are not what I think they are. So I'm sorry about that. But thank you so much for being with us. We have all of our attendees also kind of watching from behind the screen now. So yeah, shall we get started? Do you have any questions?
Yes, of course, of course.
Great. Oh, there's already a compliment in the chat, which is how I would like to continue this event. So good, we're off to a good start. So hello everyone, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us for this really exciting event. My name is Dr. Lola Boorman, and I'm an associate lecturer in the Department of English and Related Literature here at York. I'm also a co-organizer of the Contemporary Essay, which is a research strand which with Writers at York has co-sponsored this event tonight. It's my great pleasure to welcome the phenomenal Claudia Rankine to the Department of English and Related Literature at York, and a particular delight to do so on the week of International Women's Day. Claudia is a poet, playwright, and essayist whose work deeply interrogates and challenges race and white supremacy in American social and political life. Throughout her extensive body of work, which includes 5 books, 3 plays, and a series of video collaborations with her husband, John Lucas, who isn't attending on Zoom tonight, although Claudia tried to sneak in under his name. Claudia trains her uncompromising analytical eye, not only on the world around her, but on the literary forms and modes of discourse that construct and sustain our shared reality. Her work typically blends poetry and prose, drawing also on visual art, anthropology, social media, statistics, and most recently, conversation. Claudia Rankine's Citizen in American Lyric, first published in 2014, offered an unwavering diagnosis of racism in contemporary America and became a powerful aesthetic statement of the Black Lives Matter era. It is also a radical deconstruction of the lyric mode. A testament to Citizen's continuing political relevance and formal innovation, the book not only won the Forward Prize and the National Book Critics Circle Award for Poetry, but it also is the only book of poetry to have been included in the New York Times bestseller list for nonfiction. In 2016, she was awarded a MacArthur Fellowship, which she used to found the Racial Imaginary Institute, a collaborative and interdisciplinary space for artists and thinkers to engage with and explore the subject of race. Just Us, an American Conversation was published by Grey Wolf Press in September 2020, and it completes her groundbreaking trilogy of works, which includes Don't Let Me Be Lonely and Citizen. Just Us extends Claudia's investigation into the constructions of white supremacy in contemporary society and the role whiteness plays in our collective imaginations. Through a series of conversations with strangers and friends, this fascinating work interrogates the possibility of arriving at the notion of an us in a contemporary political situation that is so violently stratified. In interviews, Claudia has described the book as an attempt to apprehend the same reality, or to quote, share a definition. This difficult, affective, personal, and political work is first expressed in a poetic sequence that begins the book, a sequence entitled What If? Here, the act of conversation is presented as a powerful statement of political potentiality, one that puts language and communication at the center of this often painful and difficult work. One sentence here, I am here. As I've known you, as I'll never know you. I am here awaiting, waiting for you. In the what if, in the questions, in the conditionals, in the imperatives. What if? So just before I invite Claudia to read from Just Us, I'd just like to make a note of how we're going to run tonight's event in this kind of webinar format. So after the reading, we'll have a brief discussion about the book before opening up the room for questions. And there'll be 2 ways for you to ask a question tonight, we hope. The first is to type into the Q&A chat box, which you should see on the bottom panel there. or you can ask a question out loud. And to do this, you will just use the raise hand function, just also on the bottom there. And then we'll invite you to unmute yourself, and you can then ask your question to Claudia directly. Try not to cross-pollinate, so don't ask a question in the chat box and also put your hand up, it'll just get confusing. And please, yeah, just use the general chat for comments and compliments, and to shower Claudia with effusive praise. But I think that's enough housekeeping. I don't think I've forgotten anything, and I'll just hand over now to Claudia. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, thank you. Just because we didn't have our little pre-chat, I just want to make sure, what time would you like to switch over to the Q&A?
If we do it around, yeah, like 10 to 7. Yeah, so we'll have like about 15-20 minutes of chat between us, and then we can open it up if that works for you.
Okay. So so that would be 10 to 2 my time.
Yeah, you can definitely read for as long as you want, and I'll shut up, and I don't have to talk for as long.
Well, no. I just wanted to make sure we're on the same page. Good afternoon or good evening to everyone on your time. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I thank everyone involved in inviting me and getting me here virtually. I am going to share a PowerPoint and then begin the reading. So here we go. And slideshow. I just wanted to begin with the image on front, partly because we think that we think of the essay as an argument, and I wanted to say that the argument of the essay begins actually in the photo that you first encounter when you pick up the book, and this is by Nona Fastine. It's an image of the Washington Monument at the mall in Washington. And you see that black cloud that crosses it. That's the place where the confounded history of slavery resides inside the photograph. And so at the site of the monuments to our democracy in the United States, here we have the blurring. That is the unresolved history of violence in this country that continues. A violence that could be named anti-Black racism or white supremacy, or, however you prefer, whatever place you stand relative to that. Here's more of her work. This is at the Lincoln Memorial, another work of that, and this one is in New York at the Statue of Liberty. The epigraph to Just Us it came after the fact. The book was titled, and then in a conversation with a friend, she reminded me, the artist Alexandra Bell reminded me of this joke by Richard Pryor. And so, who took it from another comedian. He didn't actually originate the joke, but he lifted it.
I went to jail for income tax evasion, right? I didn't know a motherfucking thing about no taxes. I told the judge, said, Your Honor, I forgot. He said, you remember next year, nigga. Start writing on your ass. They give niggas time like it's lunch down there. You go down there looking for justice. That's what you find. Just us.
That epigraph apparently has confounded some people, because when they encountered it, they thought the point of view of Just Us would be inside the lives of African Americans, rather than to look at and hear white Americans talk about the ways in which they resist the label of white supremacy and their collusion and involvement with the structures that continue that in the United States. The first, the opening poem is a kind of call. And I'm going to read that before we get to the first essay. What does it mean to want an age-old call for change, not to change, and yet also to feel bullied by the call to change? How is the call to change named shame, named penance, named chastisement? How does one say, what if, without reproach? The root of chastise is to make pure, the impossibility of that. Is that what repels and not the call for change? And that piece ends with this. What if what I want from you is new, newly made, a new sentence in response to all my questions, a swerve in our relation with the words that carry us, the care that carries. I am here, without the shrug, attempting to understand how what I want and what I want from you run parallel. Justice and the openings for just us. The opening essay in Just Us was written originally for the New York Times, and it was a piece, they had asked me to write a little bit about a class I was teaching at Yale at the time, on the construction of whiteness in the United States. And in the class, the students often would interview family members and other white people in their dorms or their friends. And so I thought I would do the same. And at the time, it was pre-COVID, so I was traveling a lot. And I thought, well, where do I encounter white people that I don't know, but that I end up spending quite a few hours with? And it was in the airport. I was often sitting next to them on planes. So the essay was an attempt to talk to other business travelers, mostly, sort of 90% of the time white men. And so that is the opening essay. And I'll read a bit of it. In the early days of the run-up to the 2016 election, I was just beginning to prepare a class on whiteness to teach at Yale University, where I had been newly hired. Over the years, I had come to realize that I often did not share historical knowledge with the persons to whom I was speaking. What's redlining? Someone would ask. George Washington freed his slaves, someone else would inquire. What are Shirley cards? And how did they determine what was the correct skin tone balance? Yet another person wondered, but as I listened to Donald Trump's inflammatory rhetoric during the campaign that spring, the class took on a new dimension. Would my students understand the long history that informed a comment like the one Trump made when he announced his presidential candidacy? When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best, he said. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists. When I heard these words, I wanted my students to track immigration laws in the United States. Would they connect the current treatment of both documented and undocumented Mexicans with the treatment of Irish, Italian, and Asian people in the last century? So that opening paragraph set the scene of some of the things that would be investigated in the class. And I wanted to show you this video about Shirley cards.
This is a Shirley card. And if you developed color film between the 1940s and the 1990s, the accuracy of the colors in your photos were pretty much based on this skin tone.
Shirley was probably the name of the first person who was pictured on the card, and Shirley became the subsequent name of all the women pictured on the card.
That's Lorna Roth, a professor and researcher at Concordia University in Montreal.
Usually they were white women who wore very colorful dresses.
Color film works like this. There are layers of chemicals stacked on each other that are sensitive to different colors of lights. And there are a series of different types of chemical solutions that are used to develop them once exposed to that light. A combination of all of these chemicals creates a film's color balance. And for many decades, chemicals that would bring out various reddish, yellow, and brown tones were largely left out.
The consumer market that was designated in the design of film chemistry was that of the lighter skinned market. So when it came to defining what an idealized international skin tone would be, it turned out to be a lighter skin tone than a darker skin tone. If you're shooting people with lighter skins, it looks good. If you're shooting people with darker skins, it doesn't look so good. If you're shooting mixed race in the same screen, then we see the real problems.
It wasn't until the 1970s where things started to change, and it came from a very unlikely source.
Companies that were advertising different kinds of wood furniture were complaining that Kodak film did not render the difference between dark-grained wood and light-grained wood.
The other companies that Kodak responded to were chocolate makers, because the film couldn't render the difference between dark chocolate and milk chocolate. As the film and television industries became more diverse, color balance issues at the professional level became even more apparent. And in the 1990s, a team of designers at Philips and Breda Holland tackled the issue head on by developing a camera system that used two different computer chips to balance lighter and darker skin tones individually.
You can look that up and also see the entire thing. But the point of it is that it wasn't out of recognition that Black people weren't being photographed with any distinction, but the change was led by industry in terms of the chocolate industry and the furniture industry. So even then, and 1990s, that was not that long ago. So in case people don't understand how deep and inside the culture the erasure of Black people have been, it's even in the way in which we have been portrayed. And this issue of erasure is one that I wanted to highlight in Just Us. And the place that it shows up, one of the number of places that it shows up in the text, is inside these passages from Thomas Jefferson's note on Virginia. In the book, it's called Notes on the State of Whiteness. And I'll just read you. What I did was I went through Notes in Virginia. None of the text has changed, but I erased around it so that what was there could be lifted up so that the conversation with Jefferson becomes clear. I'll just, for those of you who haven't had a chance to look at it, I'll just read a bit. It will probably be asked, why not retain and incorporate the Blacks into the state and thus save the expense of supplying by importation of white settlers the vacancies they will leave? Deep-rooted prejudices entertained by the whites, 10,000 recollections by the Blacks of the injuries they have sustained, new provocations, the real distinctions which nature has made, and the many other circumstances will divide us into parties and produce convulsions which will probably never end, but in the extermination of this of the one or the other race. So we see that Jefferson, even back then, understood the commitments whites had to whiteness and white supremacy, and that the act of trying to exterminate, shooting unarmed people in their homes, in their backs, I can't breathe, extinguishing people's breaths by police, was something that was built into the structure of this country. The other, let's see, the other thought thing, one of the things that Jefferson also referred to in this piece is, which I found amusing, so I also included it, was poetry. He says, many millions of them have been brought to and born in America, them being people like me, Black people. Many have been so situated that they might have availed themselves of the conversation of their masters. Some have been liberally educated. They will crayon out an animal, a plant, or a country for as to prove the existence of a germ in their minds which only wants cultivation. But never yet could I find that a Black had uttered a thought above the level of plain narration. Never fee even an elementary trait of painting or sculpture. In music, they are more generally gifted than the whites, with accurate ear for tune and time. Misery is not the parent of the most affecting touches in poetry. Among the Blacks is misery enough, God knows, but no poetry. It could not produce a poet. So that was a bit that I found amusing. He was actually talking about the poet Phyllis Wheatley, who they brought her writing to Jefferson as proof, and this was his response, that she could mimic what abolitionists were teaching her, but that he didn't believe that what she was writing was actually poetry. And he had to just he had many slaves and had to justify, even as he was going around Europe talking about how slavery shouldn't exist, he himself continued to own slaves. Another form of erasure is All Lives Matter. This is Hank Willis Thomas. I wanted to include this because Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter has been in conversation over the last few years with white people thinking they are playing the trump card by claiming that there is a general humanity across the board, when in fact we all know that for them all lives include only white lives. And this was a great way in which I think Hank Willis Thomas was able to, one, have the white lettering to show who he's representing, and to turn the lives into lies. And the last erasure in the book is from the essay entitled Ethical Loneliness. The title is from a book by Jill Stouffer. In it, she says that ethical loneliness is the isolation one feels when one, as a violated person or as one member of a persecuted group, has been abandoned by humanity, or those who have power over one's life's possibilities. So when people talk about how Black people can be racist too, the reason why that's garbage, everybody can have bias, everybody can be prejudiced, but the reason why only whites are racist is because they have institutional power behind them. So the police can go in and kill people and get off and go home and grow up their children and live the rest of their lives. And that's really, you know, they can actually have an insurrection at the Capitol and then go back home and continue working in their jobs and have nothing happen to them. And the reason nothing happens to them is because what they are valuing and what they are trying to destroy are equal to the investments of the outside institutions. So that's the difference between, say, saying a Black person has prejudice. I have prejudice. People, everybody has biases and prejudices, but only white people or the people in power have racism. Or sexism, if you think about that. You know, white men have power over the possibilities of women in the world. The Germans had power over the life possibility of Jews in Germany during the reign of Hitler. So I'm going to read a little bit from Fairview. And that piece, this piece ends with an erasure. I'll tell you, the piece happened. What happened was I went with a friend to see the play Fairview by Jackie Sibley's Drury. And in that play, near the end, the fourth wall is broken. A character asks the white members of the audience to get up from their seats and walk on the stage, which has been transformed into a beige living and dining room with a staircase leading to the second floor. Faces will be revealed, composure tested. Effort must be made to stay within the requests of the play. The Black actor wishes the space of the audience to hold Black people in a way the world does not. The request is presented as a conditional. What if? What if the audience in this space of the imagination can enact something that doesn't exist in the world? Is the stage now a segregated space as the Black actors join the Blacks in the audience? Has center stage transformed into the front of the bus? Or is it now a whites only boardroom? In the moment, no one knows what really is being proclaimed. A white man in the seat behind me says, "This is fucked up." Nonetheless, he makes his way to the stage. The white woman I am with remains in her seat. I am getting tense. The playwright is a Black woman and I am a Black woman, and I want the play to have what it has requested, what I assume it needs. Is my identification with the playwright because she's Black or because she's a woman or because she's an artist? It's impossible to dissect. My tension begins to couple with a building resentment against my white friend. I feel betrayed by her. I am not the playwright. The playwright might think the success of the play depends on some white people staying in their seats. The playwright might be waiting for a Black person to get on the stage with the white people. None do. The playwright might want me to think her request is divisive and walk out of the theater, not a Black stage, not a white stage, but a united stage. The playwright might have calculated what percentage of the audience, white members of the audience, would not comply. Are my unbearable feelings a sign that I, a Black member of the audience, remain inside the play? The playwright might think, why are they listening to me? As more and more white audience members fill up the stage and people of color stay seated, will the stage hold all the white people? Or, and this is what is troubling me, the playwright might have said exactly what she wants to happen. I am trying to listen to the actor speak the closing lines of the play, which it turns out are composed of quotes from famous Black writers. But all I can think about is my white friend's non-compliant presence in her seat. Why won't she do what was asked? I can't understand why she can't do such a simple thing. Why can't she see it matters? Does it matter? In the sense that race matters, her refusal feels like an insistence on full ownership of the entire theater. Oh God, I'm beginning to feel pushed out of my own seat for the last minutes of the play, burdened by my association with her refusal, a moment of Frenchman's perhaps. Taxi, I want to run. Away from what? An embodied refusal I can't help but see, and one that surprises me. My own mounting emotion in the face of what I perceive as belligerence. A friendship error despite my understanding of how whiteness functions. I thought we shared the same worldview, if not the same privileges. Be still, my beating, breaking heart. When the play finally ends, I say to my confounding friend, I didn't know you were Black. She doesn't respond. Given the irritation in my voice, it's not a comment seeking a response. It's my performance of my own refusal to engage beyond the terms of the play. Her performance of resistance felt like no solidarity, insofar as I, as a Black woman, dropped away, as the request of the play dropped away. She must understand the play's request is made in response to a world where Black people's requests don't matter. Why doesn't she recognize the moment as an offering of Black feminism? Though my friend and I are in the habit of checking in every few days over the next couple of weeks, we speak of everything but this day. Still, I can't stop returning to the image of her glued to her seat. She was 5 rows from the stage. Why does the memory continue to infuriate and perplex me? Why am I not able to read this moment? Why am I not able to stop reading this moment? Why am I unable to settle it down and file it away? And that piece goes on, and one of the things I did with these essays was, once I wrote the essay, I then went to my therapist, and I say my therapist, but the therapist was engaged for this project. And I took our agreement was that I would bring in the piece, read the piece to her, and then we would discuss why I did and said the things that I said. Why was I upset by this? Why did I say to her, I didn't know you were Black? What was the emotion I was feeling? And to try and unpack that and see sort of where I was culpable, what I was doing in those moments. Once I did that, I rewrote the essay based on what I learned in that conversation. And then after that, the essay was sent to be fact checked to see that if there were any statements that I might have made that were not true. That process wasn't so much in this one. This one, the fact checking was more, it comes alongside an essay by Audre Lorde given in 1981. And then once it went through all of these processes, I then sent the essay back to my friend. And I said, is this what happened? Is this, do you think this accurately accounts for what happened between us on that day? And would you like to respond? And so what if you were inside the text, you would see that her response is what follows the essay. So there's my essay, there's a picture of the living room from the play, and then there's her response. And I'll just close out on a few lines from what she says. May be of interest to you and important to me. I know I shrink sometimes a lot, sometimes a little, from scenes where I am asked personally or generally to feel bad as a white person. Where whatever else is being asked, I'm also being asked to feel shame, guilt, to do penance, to stand corrected, to sit down chastised. Obviously, some of the shrinking is just because who wouldn't? No one enjoys being chastised. Or do they? This is where my reaction becomes important to me. I react with a kind of nausea when I smell, as Daryl Pitney put it, white audiences who confuse having been chastised with learning. Of course, there are reasons to feel shame, guilt, to be corrected, etc. That is, there is real history, and there are real situations and experiences and exchanges that call for them. And some of my action is per who wouldn't, straight up defensive. But situations, claims, bod, posts, diversity, workshop, activities, whatever, manufactured specifically to elicit white shame, penance, etc., make me uneasy. I feel like unholy transactions are in the offering, like white moral masochism is getting a thrill. What she doesn't account for is the fact that she was not at a diversity training session, but at a play that was offering a what if. So I will end there, and we can move to questions.
Brilliant, thank you. Thanks so much, Claudia. Do you want to keep your screen up, or do you want to?
Oh, sorry about that.
No, that's fine. We can have a.
I'm gonna close, stop share. That's what I'm looking for. Okay.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. And I'm really pleased that you brought up that essay, Ethical Loneliness. I wanted to kind of think about that essay in particular for a number of different reasons, and hopefully we can get to them all. But one of the things specifically that is interesting about that piece is I think it's one of the only ones in Just Us that is kind of delineated into 3 sections. And so you have your kind of recounting of the event, of the kind of encounter with your friend, and I'm really interested to see how that has actually come together with the therapist and the fact checking, and then you have your friend's response, which is in the 2nd section, and the 3rd section is what you had on your slide, which is the poem that kind of comes out of that. And what interests me in this sequence is kind of how form is working here. So how you kind of have this kind of personal response, or kind of a personal sort of essay coming from you, which is also an engagement with a piece of art, a play. And then you have your friend's response, and then your friend's kind of unsatisfactory response gives way to this poem that also kind of has a lot of space in it, right? And I'll hold it up to the screen again, but it has a lot of kind of blank space and gaps in it. And I wonder kind of, can you talk a little bit about how all of these kind of formal transformations are working in Just Us? Because it's something that happens across the collection.
Well, one of the things I wanted the essays to do is to, one, reenact conversation and take them apart and think about sort of what lines of inquiry we could go down if we followed every thought. Why did we say that? Why did she say that? What spillage is occurring from our histories before we even encounter each other? And what's the actual history? And so the division of the pages between the verso and the recto was to have the verso pages function as a kind of not corrective, but an associative fact checker. Then her response becomes the actual engagement. It's not the engagement of the play, but it is an engagement between the speaker and the subject of the initial essay. And her response, attempts to justify her own thinking, and she wrote it, so it does justify her own thinking. And the final erasure, the 3rd section, I wanted to go back to the original essay and say that maybe some of the conjecture was not necessary, that her inability to stand where I stood is her inability to stand where I stood. And so that this entire enterprise of going down all of these different lines of inquiry to try and understand what she did, and also her attempt to explain what she did, in fact, never closed the gap between the two of us in that moment. So that was an attempt to like get at the thing from the same thing, but from three positions.
Yeah, and I mean this issue of kind of fact checking, and whether that is the idea of kind of rewriting, of kind of reprocessing, it is something that the collection seems incredibly interested in, and you use a kind of very distinctive formal feature where you use kind of footnotes. Well, I don't know that we can necessarily call them footnotes, but they're kind of these kind of extra kind of citational devices throughout. And sometimes that is to include a quotation, sometimes it's to include statistics, but often it's to fact check statements that are in the kind of main body of your essay. Why did you make the decision to do this, and kind of why was this kind of important for what you were doing here?
Well, because I think right now we're in a really bizarre moment where facts have lost their place in our lives. You know, pedagogy, we all spend a lot of time in institutions learning, but it's shocking how under the Trump administration, you can just make allegations about things being wrong and that's fine. It's just, you know, it's, you can say there's no climate change. You can say that COVID doesn't kill people. And suddenly that's the fact. And, you know, and so it was sort of my own way of saying, no, there are actual facts. There is a reality that both of us can disagree on what and how we're going to manage the reality, but the reality stays the same. It's raining, it's raining. And, you know, you telling me it's not raining when it's raining doesn't stop it from raining.
Yeah. And I think it does a really interesting way of doing that. It kind of balances the sort of rhetoric of these conversations with this kind of stark reality. And you kind of draw a lot of evidence from lots of different places, including from social media. And so you're kind of balancing these kind of sometimes anthropological sources, sometimes sociological sources, statistics and data, with kind of social media and kind of grabbing from people's Twitter and things like that. So I mean, that's something that we also kind of saw happening in Citizen as well. But how do you feel about that kind of blend of, I mean, this kind of academic form, which is kind of how Justice sort of starts? It begins at Yale with your course, and then it kind of moves into this wider kind of cultural space. Can you talk a bit about how that works?
Well, the mix of citational references were an attempt to build the world of the world that comes into our personal spaces. So we have the pedagogy because we're inside institutions, and we can have the sites from sociology or from historical books, but also we have a moment when, because of social media platform, we can also have the stories of other people, and they can in real time communicate those stories to us through social media. And so I was taking advantage of that as well. Like, and it was important to show it was coming from social media. So we kept the screen grab of it, so that all of the skepticism that one should also bring to social media, because nobody's actually fact checking it in the sense of did this actually happen to the person as they communicated. I wanted that to also be clear that this is, you know, but there are also newspaper, there are images, there are all of that. And it was a party, like, you know, you can think that only pedagogy supports this, but there's actually real lives that get affected by these things. And here's an attestment to that. In fact, here's an image of that. In fact, here's a video of that, you know, and so that's the build that happens in the citational spaces in Just Us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean that's something that comes through really wonderfully in your work, and was such a kind of impactful part of Citizen as well. I want to kind of think a little bit, thinking again about ethical loneliness, and about this interaction with your friend. So a lot of the kind of press and reviews of the book have focused on the liminal spaces sequences, which are the sequences where you're talking to white men in airports or on airplanes about white privilege. But there's just as many, almost just as many essays in the book about talking to white women. And these are actually seem to me to be more difficult encounters, especially kind of, you know, how you've described this one with your friend. And I wonder, you know, is there something going on with gender there, or how you kind of experience that gender difference, or if there was one for you? I know it's maybe unfair because it's more difficult to talk to your friends sometimes about these things than to perfect strangers, but yeah, was that a factor?
No, I think that it's actually not more difficult to talk to my friends if the friend and I have a history of talking about these things. So, for example, the Big Little Lies section, that's a friend who I've known for a long time and who is used to me interrogating moments like that one and other ones, and that we have managed in our lives. In, you know, we've known each other since we were 30, and now we're 60, so 30 years, and we have managed to be able to navigate those encounters, those conversations, without breaking our friendship.
Mm-hmm.
The encounters with white men, with the exception of my husband, I would say, those were either the beginnings of a friendship or really one-time conversations. People I met on, you know, in transit in liminal space and never saw again, except for the third guy in the first essay who ended up writing back and saying, actually, some of the things I said to you weren't true. And I didn't realize they weren't true until I thought about them after the fact. And so he's somebody that I now correspond with. In terms of gender, I think, you know, I think my women friends, whatever race they are, Black, white, Arab, whoever they are, Indigenous women, I have built those friendships over time, and so have a greater intimacy with those women. But not all of the friendships survive. You know, some people don't want the discomfort of somebody who questions what they say or do. And so the Fairview person, for example, we don't speak that much anymore. And I don't consider the friendship over. I just think if she needs a break, she can have it, you know, and we'll see in the future. But so I think it's not, I just don't tend to have a lot of downtime with men where you're kind of just walking around shopping or walking around doing other things. Usually when I am with men, it's either work or this kind of travel situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, thinking about those essays, kind of liminal spaces, you make a kind of crucial distinction, and this is something that I guess you try to untangle throughout throughout the book is the distinction between white privilege and what you call white living. And because the term white privilege becomes a kind of stopping point, or a kind of tangle or knot that prevents a lot of these conversations that you have. Can you say more about this distinction and why you think it's there, and what the kind of problems with privilege, the idea of privilege is?
Well, I think for a lot of white people, when they hear the word privilege, they think monetary privilege. They don't think, oh, it's a privilege to be able to walk down the street. It's a privilege to be able to enter your own home without somebody calling the police. It's a privilege to sit in Starbucks and have a conversation with a friend before ordering without somebody calling the police. You know, they don't think of those things as privilege. I think of those as just life, and they're entitled to that. And yet, if they see a Black person doing it, they feel like, you shouldn't have access to this. Or I can't believe you live in the same building I do. That, you know, I don't know, I'm still trying to figure out what that is. Why somebody, I mean, I know people say, oh, because, you know, Black people want to steal my stuff, and so they couldn't possibly live where I live. But the fantasies that are controlling this kind of paranoid violence it sort of finds its basis in segregationist orientation in a way. So now I'm thinking about something else and I forgot where we were going up with that. So you have to remind me.
Yeah, the distinction between white privilege and white living.
Oh yes. And so when I would ask people about privilege, they would tell me that they worked hard, that they had what they, you know, that they didn't come from money. And I'm like, no, I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about just basic things that you're able to do in your life. And that's what the term actually refers to. So the word privilege was sort of throwing off those discussions. But, you know, do we have time? I can show you the perfect video, actually.
Yeah.
I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if I can pull it up. I want to see if I have it easily. I might not, I thought I had it on here, but do I? Oh, here. So this is a police training video. This is, the government has come into a police station to train the officers on why they need to think about the population that they're in.
Even accurate, because if you can have a basis for where the number comes from and what the situation is that puts them in that situation. Mm-hmm. I mean, are they more likely to be in this situation than somebody that's not transgender? Mm-hmm. Yes. Which I don't know what that is. I'm just saying. My wife has never been part of police violence. Most of the people that I know have never been accused of police of violence. So I guess I don't get where that statistic comes from.
Because you're white male privilege, so you wouldn't know.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm with this training.
Let's bring it down a notch, okay? Let's bring it down a notch.
Want to keep it safe and professional.
It's not.
That's my role in objective. So I don't want to focus on the statistics, because quite frankly,
get away with that?
no.
Seriously, I'm asking a legitimate question.
Let me help you.
And I'm getting taught white privilege. Are you serious? I find that extremely offensive.
Okay.
And I'm in here, but not as professional as I can, and learn.
Trying to talk. Please sit down. All right. Hold on a second.
No, I will leave. I will file it on your desk.
we're not talking about white privilege here. We're trying to focus on a different demographic. I'm going to keep this professional, and I apologize if anybody is offended. This data that we have here,
So, I mean, that was just, they were talking about why transgender people are experiencing violence in their interactions with the police. There was a white female police officer who said, well, maybe you don't understand because it's of your white male privilege. She was then put on administrative leave, not the guy who shouts. She was put on administrative leave. She had to go to a hearing. And then it was put in her file. And she was removed from interaction with other police officers. So she was given desk work because apparently using the term white privilege was racist, according to them. And so I thought, you know, I don't understand how they don't understand that their ability to have mobility in the world without being questioned is a privilege, but apparently they don't understand that. But maybe if we change the term to white living and generalize it out, it will remove the economic sense of being handed something that you didn't work for from the equation.
Yeah. And yeah, that's a really powerful video that you write about in Just Us, but it's pretty amazing to see it there. And because this idea of kind of privilege is something that you do kind of interrogate across the collection, right? So in relation to white privilege, but also in relation to class, seemed to be something that you were kind of trying to disentangle as well throughout. And you know, we're seeing you in a number of kind of privileged spaces and encountering these people in a number of privileged spaces, a Yale classroom, first class on an airplane, and then in the essay, specifically Big Little Lies, where you're kind of thinking about your place in all of this. So kind of how important was also a kind of consideration of class to how you were trying to think through these ideas?
Well, you know, it is because of the British, actually, that I felt like I needed to make that distinction, because I think often the Brits like to say, you know, class is an issue here, but race isn't. And even with the recent interview with Meghan and the Prince and Oprah, it sounds like a Disney movie, Meghan, the Prince and Oprah, we saw that class is irrelevant, that race finds its way. The treatment that she was subject to is racism. There's no other way to frame it but as racism. And that doesn't matter if she's married to the prince or not. And so I was really interested in saying, deliberately using, you know, removing the narrative of the poor Black is in this situation because of poverty, because of lack of access, because of whatever. The treatment of Black people is regardless of class. And that's why the pieces were posited in those, you know, in the way, framed in the way they were in First Class. And also, that is my life. I'm not trying to pretend that my life doesn't look like that. It's also a little bit misleading because I'm not paying for First Class. You know, it's basically business class. I think if the very wealthy people are not on those planes, you know, they're on private planes. They're not on those planes. But even within that realm of middle class living, you are going to experience it. It's not really about a class distinction. It is about a culture where Black people are treated in this way, no matter where they reside along the class line.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that distinction is really interesting. And it is something that comes through really, I think actually throughout the book, you do create quite a very interesting kind of dialogue between, about that idea of privilege, and how it kind of intersects to, and with race. I think we will go now to questions. I have so many more questions for you, Claudia, but we'll let some others get a word in. And just as a way to kind of bridge our move into the general Q&A, I'm going to invite Flora, who I should have introduced at the beginning of the session, who's assisting me with the tech today, and he's one of our wonderful postgraduate students who's actually writing her PhD on you, Claudia. And Flora has a question, so I'm going to use kind of chair's privilege to give her the first one. So Flora, if you want to come in there.
Thanks, Lola, and thank you so much, Claudia, for such an interesting and insightful talk. I just wanted to ask really just a bit about the series, I suppose. So Just Us ends a series which began in 2004, and you write throughout the series of the rapidity of the news cycle and the speed at which our culture and our societies have conveniently forgets to continue a conversation. How important was it to you to enact this series over a period of, what, nearly 18 years?
Thank you for that question. And thank you for knowing that it didn't start with Citizen. Many people are like, oh, you wrote that book, Citizen, and then are you going to write another one? I'm like, I wrote some other ones before that. When I wrote Don't Let Me Be Lonely, I didn't think I was writing a series. I just wrote Don't Let Me Be Lonely in response to 9/11 and the clear culture that was forming in the United States, anti-Arab culture. And was sort of surprised to see myself also looking around. I'm like, what is that? How quickly we fall into that. And also, it was an elegiac piece because there had been so much death, and then people were dying around us in other ways. And then I think 10 years passed, and Citizen, I wanted to pull out of Lonely the anti-Black racism, because Lonely, took on medical death and all kinds of death. But Citizen was an attempt to pull out the anti-Black racism that had occurred in Lonely, but hadn't been centralized. And during the time between the two books, there had been so many murders. And I think with the cell phone, with the rise of the cell phone in the US, suddenly the families who were grieving, people who were nearby, were able to centralize those deaths in a way that the national news had not done. So suddenly the news wasn't telling you what you should be thinking about and reading, but people were on social media. They were saying, look, this person just got shot in the back by police. Look, another one. Look, this woman in her house, police came in, shot her dead. And so we were seeing all of this. And so Citizen was an attempt to pull that forward. And after Citizen, I was giving a talk and a man said to me in the audience, what can I do for you? How can I help you? This is horrible, what's happening to Black people. How can I help you? And a white man. And I thought, and I said to him, I don't need your help, I'm fine. But you might think about the world you want to live in, and you might ask yourself, how can you help yourself in this society? And he got very angry with me. And I thought, wow, this is somebody who read Citizen, said he loved it, got up to offer his help. And when I say to him, look, I'm fine, I don't need your help, but you might ask yourself what you can do for you to create a better world. He just said, his exact words were, if you're gonna answer questions like that, nobody's gonna ask you anything. And I was really taken aback. I was like, whoa, how did we get from A to B so quickly? And that's when I realized that white people really don't want to talk about racism if they're involved in it. Mm-hmm. Like somehow they have been able to read all of this stuff about the violence against Indigenous people, Black people, all kinds of people, and feel that they are not implicated in it. That racism exists without white people, in a sense. And so I thought, no, I really need to reposition the work so that it's, even as it looks at the same thing, involves the people who are doing the violence. And that led to Just Us, the conversation as a mode of engaging everybody, not just the victim, but the victims, and those of us who stand around letting it happen, who through our silence continue the violence. So that was the trajectory of the three books, which each sort of called to the next. But without me knowing I was actually going to land there. And because I sort of want to end with Just Us, one, the genre has shifted very aggressively into the essay by Just Us, even though there is some lyric poetry in there. And the idea that the essay argues for a thing, I wanted to change that from the argument towards a thing and the opening of a thing. So that the essay is a line of inquiry around a thing rather than an argument for a thing. So that we could join each other in this line of inquiry, in the mode of questions, in the interest in each other.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful. And yeah, you've actually also kind of surreptitiously answered a question we had in the chat as well about essays and arguments. So we'll move on to the next one. This is one from Rosie. Less of a question and more of a comment. I'm interested in the relationship between the title of your essays and the topics they handle, in particular complicit freedom and blondness, and was wondering if you could touch on this a little.
Well, complicit freedom was an essay that came about in part because I was giving a talk at an all-Black school, and a Black female professor asked me what she should say to her Black students who dyed their hair blonde. And I was thinking, nothing. You should say nothing to them. They should be able to do what they want. But it, as those moments always do, it made me begin to see differently. Suddenly I looked around and I realized, oh, there's so many white women who dyed their hair blonde. What's going on? And it was not a question I had been sort of thinking about. And then when I did research, there was also, a lot of articles about how everybody in the news, at least in the United States, those representing the media also all dyed their hair blondes. And then, of course, we have Marilyn Monroe. We have what happens in Hollywood. And so complicit freedom as a title became something that I wanted to take in the idea that complicity could happen sort of accidentally, or not accidentally, but unconsciously, like that there was a history that we were buying into about the value of a thing without often investigating what it was we were communicating by doing it. And so then somebody at Radio 4 asked me if I would interview people. So we did in the United States and in London. It was Joe Wheeler at Radio 4. And so Joe and I went around with, and we just stopped people in the street and said, why did you dye your hair blonde? and they were like, oh, you know, lots of. But often when you push and ask the second question, do you dye your hair any other color? No, I don't. Why not? People like me better if I'm blonde. Men treat me better if I'm blonde. Women treat me better if I'm blonde. Why do you think that's so? I don't know. You know, and so, and that became, and sometimes, and then in the United States, I asked some, I think the most tragic one was a young Black woman. She must have been in her mid to late 20s. And I asked her why she dyed her hair blonde. And she said, well, because it makes me look lighter. And I don't know, maybe something happened on my face when she said that, because she said, even my mother says so. And that to me was so, you know, it was just like a stab in the heart in terms of what that means. So the freedom to dye your hair any color you want, who cares? You know, I wanted a title that communicated that this wasn't a judgment call around what people did. You should be able to do what you want. You're a woman. You should make your own choices. But also be aware that it's complicit with a white supremacist ideology that whiteness and blondness is closer to pureness. And that has been, you know, something that the Reich bred children towards, literally. And, you know, and that's what's being fed to us in the media with, you know, you see a picture of Donald Trump and his daughters and wives, etc. And they're all blonde. They're, you know, they're all in red and they're all blonde. And so the message is that this is closer to whiteness without saying it.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I'm glad that somebody brought that essay up, because Claudia, you began by looking at the cover of the edition. And on the British edition, we have this.
Yes.
Is the blonde and brunette hair. So our next question is from Emily. I'm wondering about the movement from lyric to conversation. Citizen in particular interrogates pronouns, the pronoun barely holding the person together. You write, you can't put the past behind you, it's buried in you. It's turned your flesh into its own cupboard. And reading Citizen always makes me feel that, the way history is inescapably inside me. But reading Just Us feels more like you, the first person, not obviously absenting itself from history. But can you say something about the shift from the deconstructed lyric form and the shift away from the you?
The shift to the first person in Just Us was intentional because I felt like I was asking people to become vulnerable, to step into conversation with other people, to be aware of why they might say stuff, how they are formed by the culture, how they were made by the culture they lived in, how the beliefs of their parents and grandparents still live within them. And I didn't think it was a fair ask without showing up myself, you know, showing up as me. I've never actually done that before. And so I thought, you know, you can't make this ask and then hide from it yourself. And so that's why I thought, okay, this book is going to be written from the place of honesty, from the place of where I live, from where I fail, from where I project, from where I get angry, from places of vulnerability, like my illness with cancer, my argument with my husband, my desire for my daughter, my aspirational, you know, all of those things go into making me who I am. And I can be me. I don't have to perform any particular notion of Blackness to engage the subject of anti-Black racism. You know, and I think some people don't approve of that, but that was the decision I made for this book.
And I mean, I think it's very effective. Our final, well, yeah, we'll see how far we get with this question, and it might be our last one, but we'll see. So it's slightly long. I feel oddly struck, this is from a colleague of mine, Boriana. I feel oddly struck by the white friend's response, I presume in ethical loneliness, that no one enjoys being shamed or chastised, and that is why she refused to get out of her seat. The idea that we may only be asked or expect to do things that we enjoy strikes me as a particular marker of privilege. I also wonder, is there a necessary facet of feminist politics and civil rights work that entails allowing ourselves to accept relational pain? Systemic oppressions, including racist oppression, create inequalities whereby some of us have no choice but to live in pain constantly, whereas others get the privilege of opting in or out of living that pain. Is there room for an ethics of allies choosing / actively taking on certain forms of pain? And can we think of acts of taking on pain not as self-flagellation or chastisement, but as necessary effects of relating within violent systems?
I think, you know, and I think in this case, it's generous to talk about pain. I mean, we're talking about slight discomfort. She was being asked to take on a little bit of discomfort, not pain per se. You know, I think one of the problems that might exist in the language, because I think the idea that one is an ally has been a very popular mode of talking about how to confront and engage systems of violence in our various countries. But I am against the term ally because I feel like I'm not an ally for things that I think are wrong. I just think they're wrong. And I don't feel like I'm an ally to Jewish people. I feel like I object to anti-Semitism. I object to homophobia. I don't want it around me. I don't want people enacting things. I will not sit in a meeting where I think those things are going on. And it is an insult to me. It's an affront to me. I don't care if there are other Jewish people in the room. I don't care if there are other queer people in the room. I don't want it to happen. And I think white people should have that feeling around anti-Black racism. That it's not a question of being an ally to Black people or people of color or BIPOC people. It's about objecting to that systemic subjugation of other human beings in whatever form it takes. It turns out that the form it's been taking has been directed systemically to Black people without interruption for hundreds of years, but it should be, it's not like I'm here for you. It's like, no, this is, and we have had a history of people like Turner saying, this ain't right. I don't know if you all have seen that. There's, I think, a comedy script where they're like, this ain't right. And I really feel like that position of this ain't right should be the position we have for these things that are not right. And it's not about allyship. It's about this ain't right.
Yeah. This next question is from one of our undergraduates. Titileo, what would you say needs to be confronted first, featureism or colorism? And are there ways within the Black community we can begin to dismantle?
I think you froze. You froze. So.
Oh, I'm sorry. So the question is from Titileo, where would you say what would you say needs to be confronted first, featureism or colorism? Are there any ways within the Black community we can begin to dismantle such projected structures of whiteness?
Well, I think colorism, I don't know exactly what featureism is, but colorism is certainly something that speaks more to self-hatred and the taking in of white stereotypes onto the person, and that it should be perpetuated in families. It's understandable how it happened, but people really need to stop it. They really need to interrogate why they do it, where it came from, you know, and there have been campaign after campaign, the Black is Beautiful campaign, the Black Power movement. But again and again, we see these modes tragic, and I see them as tragic modes, in fact. In fact, I will show you, I'm gonna share again my screen. Let's see if I can do this quickly. Get to
point.
This image of the baseball player. I mean, what you have to go through to change your skin color, your eye color, your hair quality. I mean, how do you live inside that person? So that's what's tragic about both the colorism and the featureism. And that's work that has to be done inside the Black community. And it's not just the Black community, it's, you know, Asian communities, Indian communities, all kinds of East Asian communities. That sense that acceptance comes with a closeness to whiteness, an inability to feel that one's place is justified in the world if you have dark skin, if you are not a replica of whiteness. You know, I had a friend say to me, and I really had to stop the conversation. She said to me, you know, I watched the interview between Meghan and Oprah, and I couldn't believe how the British were treating Meghan, and it's not even like she looks Black. And I was like, excuse me? What do you mean she doesn't look Black? Like, if she looked Black, it would be okay. But she doesn't even look Black. So that's how deep the hatred of Black people are.
We have one final question. I think we have time to squeeze it in, if that's okay. This is actually from one of Flora's students. Flora teaches part-time at a secondary school, so it's one of her secondary school students who's been your work. I was wondering about how you came to choose to write Citizen as a lyric. What does the form bring, and what is the idea of an American lyric to you? And thank you so much for the talk.
That is an excellent question. You know, an American lyric is for me the idea that the expression of the song of America includes these stories as well. That we have lyrics that come out of America, like Walt Whitman or Emily Dickinson, but there's also this. There's this. And the thing with Citizen, they came out of interviews. I interviewed people and then I wrote them. These are stories, you know, the lyric is traditionally considered something that is personal, belongs to the I, is almost overheard. And so these are stories that were told to me, and then I sat down and wrote them in order to create a new kind of song for the reality of the experiences and the pain that African Americans experience. So that's where they came from.
Thank you. I think we will have to wrap up here, and I apologize again for our slightly slow start and our technical issues. But thank you so much, Claudia, for such a thoughtful and provocative discussion. I hope you'll all join me in thanking Claudia in the chat, and virtual applause, because we can't give it to you in real life, I'm afraid, at the moment. For those of you who don't already have a copy of Just Us, you can now purchase a discounted copy from our local independent bookshop, Fox Lane Books, and the link is going into the chat now for that, but you can also find it on the Eventbrite page. I just want to say a big thank you to Fox Lane Books, and also to the writers at York team, so JT Welsh, Juliana Mensa and Vani Capildeo, who helped support getting this event off the ground at the beginning. And thanks also to Helen Barrett for pulling lots of administrative strings. And finally, thank you to Flora as well, who's been doing a great job managing all this tech and helping to organize as well. If the conversations this evening have interested you, have a look at some of the work we're doing with our research strand on the contemporary essay. And we'll put the link for our website in the chat. And if you'd like to join us again next week, next Thursday, for another Writers at York event, we have our prize-winning poet Will Harris in conversation with our own writer of residence, Vani Capildeo. So you can join us next Thursday at 5, I think it is, and the link again is going in the chat. But thank you so much, Claudia. It's been absolutely fantastic to talk to you, and thank you for such a wonderful reading and presentation. Please, everybody, go buy Just Us. It's absolutely fantastic.
Thank you, Lola. Thank you, Flora, for the fantastic questions and taking the time with the work.
Thank you, everyone. We'll end it there. So have a good evening.
You too. Bye-bye.